Hi, I'm going to talk about two words that sort of annoy me, and I'm an applied linguist, which is basically a language teacher with some linguistics training. Um, and take it all with a grain of salt. Definitely don't need linguistics training to understand what I'm talking about here. And it's more like if you're a real linguist, you'll find the first phrase that annoys me to be kind of trite and unimportant, very prescriptivist. And I'm not a prescriptivist, but I just can't help but notice whenever this word is used in a particular way that sort of gets under my skin. The second one is maybe more important, but probably requires even less linguistics training to understand my problem with it. So, the one that's really trite, the first one, be comprised of, bothers me because, let's see, mainly because the people who use this phrase are trying to sound academic when they use it, which leads me to think they should be sensitive to language use, and they should know that they're basically using comprise as a synonym of compose. Um, and we already have a phrase, be composed of, that does the job of be comprised of and is consistent with the meaning of compose and as well as the meaning of passive voice, right? So if you know compose, you can figure out what be composed of means. If you know comprise, what's strange about comprise is that comprise and be comprised of seem to mean the same thing, right? They seem to be synonyms of each other, which I don't think works with any other verb. The passive voice is never the same as its active voice, as its transitive active voice, right? But it is for be comprised of. So if you try to reverse engineer the meaning of comprise from be comprised of, you end up with what's exactly the same as compose. But actually, when people use the verb comprise by itself actively, they usually get the meaning right, which makes me think that we don't need be comprised of it at all. Right? So, like I said, it's usually people who are trying to sound formal who use be comprised of, which again smacks of irony because I mean, these people are probably prescriptivists in other areas. Like, they wouldn't say that you should say imply when you mean infer or infer when you mean imply. But they're, for some reason, not very sensitive to the usage of comprise, right? So there's an irony there. Yeah, so if you ask people to describe what comprise means and then what the passive voice of comprise should mean, they would probably be able to tell you because, again, these are mostly like highfalutin academic types who use this phrase. In fact, I was reading a book yesterday that used be comprised of, and it's an academic text. Um, but yeah, I don't know, it just slips people's mind a lot. And, like every seemingly prescriptivist claim about the way language should be, it really boils down to a case that I know the difference, and if other people act as if there's no difference, it reduces the value of that thing that I know, which is very selfish, and that's why this example is kind of trite. An example of a word or phrase that bothers me is kind of trite. It really is. But I did do some Coca searches to see if I was actually correct in thinking that see, I thought most people, when they use comprise, use it correctly, and I guess by correctly I mean according to the strictest, most orthodox standards. Strictest is also kind of a prescriptivist phrase. I don't mean strictest. I guess I just mean according to the meaning that I think it should have. Um, and so when people use comprise, they use comprise actively. They use it the way I think they should. But when they use be comprised of, they're wrong. But I still think that comprised of, be comprised of, is less common than comprise, which means that it's not a majority usage, right? So I'm not just running behind the train trying to catch up to this changing language, English, and yelling at the train to stop. I'm actually on the train, and some people are maybe ahead of the train. I don't know. That metaphor didn't really work. Anyway, I think my orthodox usage still outnumbers the unorthodox usage. So these are my search results on Coca. I found comprise is less common than comprised, but that doesn't do in my case yet because we don't know if this comprised is the past participle or the past tense. Comprising and comprises, that comprising might be the adjective comprising too, so that doesn't really tell me anything. Comprises with the third person S is almost definitely being used correctly, again, according to what I think is correct. So I searched just for the past tense of comprised, so excluding the past participle, and you can see that uh, it's quite high, but not quite half of the total that was comprised. Um, that just means when people are using comprised as a past tense and using it in the way that I think it should be used, it's I guess I'm talking in circles now. It's not it doesn't quite catch up to how much they use it, probably incorrectly with its past participle. Okay, and then the numbers for comprise, just the base form, comprise the simple present, and then sorry, I skipped a slide. Comprises, um, say they all outnumber the what I regard as the incorrect uses of comprised, be comprised of, which means I'm probably right. The people who use it the way I think it should be used still outnumber the people who use it the way I think it shouldn't be used. And you can see these are just searching for be verb, comprised, and then of, which should really only get me the passive voice for comprised. And you see that surprisingly, it's high under academic, but it's the second highest category that this occurs in is web general, which makes me think, um, let's see, it's probably academics hearing this in their regular life that are then using it in academic papers, and maybe being misled by Twitter into thinking that this is a proper academic phrase. Anyway, so that was all a very trite case against be comprised of. And then some evidence that I'm not really in the minority on this. But the word that's maybe has a little bit more of a serious case against it is performative in its probably most common meaning now, which is something done for basically as a performance, done through effort in order to show something to other people. And I say it's often pejorative because we talk dismissively about other people doing things performatively. Like recently with the protests that have been going on, there's been accusations of performative allyship, meaning people, putting their Instagram feeds all black, doing something in order to show other people that they, I don't know, that they sympathize with the cause without, I don't know, doing anything more substantive. That's not really, it sort of is my opinion, but it's also the meaning in which I often hear this word used as a pejorative meaning for show and not with any essence, right? So, also it's used as an accusation as part of this memeplex of the political tribes that we're in nowadays, as an accusation of obvious in-group signaling, which is called virtue signaling on the conservative side, which is kind of silly when you think about it. I mean, if you believe that virtue signaling is a real phenomenon, you have to recognize that it's part of any subculture, and it's probably a symptom of a pretty serious problem that the right thinks that they don't do this, right? It sort of dovetails with that whole idea of whose opinions are objective and whose opinions are just opinions, right? I suppose the right is more likely to believe that their opinions are actually true. That might not be justified. But the fact that people use the term virtue signaling to talk about liberals exclusively kind of implies that they think that they don't do this. Anyway, but I often hear the word performative used sort of with the same meaning as, accusing someone of virtue signaling. Anyway, the reason I think this is a problem is because the word performative has a second meaning, which is pretty technical and difficult to grok. The first comes from linguistics, and I think of the second as sort of an extension of the first. So the first meaning is that certain verbs can be accomplished by saying them. When we say a performative verb, it's a verb like declare, where when you say I declare, you are declaring something. And that's not true of a lot of verbs. Like when you say I hereby jog, you're not actually jogging, right? But when you say I hereby, I hereby announce, that is an announcement, right? That is announcing. That's the act that that verb describes. That's what a performative verb is. And then the second of the second meanings is sort of an extension of that. That certain phenomena only come to exist through performance. And the reason this is significant is that they're often traits that are assumed to be innate, where the performance expresses the innate fact or the brute fact. But certain philosophers, and I first heard about this from Judith Butler, I think she's most associated with this. Um, I forgot how this sentence started. She says that the innate fact that is supposedly the basis of the performance actually doesn't exist, and only the performance is the basis of that categorization. And she applies this to gender. So basically, she would say there's no biological sex at the basis of gender performance, it's just gender performance, and that's how we recognize gender, or that's what gender is. Um, and the reason that I have a problem with the first meaning of performative, which is the pejorative meaning, in light of this second meaning, is because the first meaning sort of trivializes the, I guess you might call the founding ideology of a disenfranchised and marginalized group, which is transgender individuals. Um, if we accept the meaning of performative, and I say this keeping in mind that often people have no trouble at all keeping meanings of words separate in their minds. If we use the word performative habitually, pejoratively, wow, um, as something done for show, something done selfishly to show other people that to show, I don't know, to virtue signal, I guess, to take the most pejorative version of this, um, then it can, I suppose, and I imagine, it can bleed over into people imagining that when people say gender is performative, that people who are transgender are also doing it just for show, or somehow making a show of, let's see, rather than it coming from an organic place of what they really feel they are, having it be something that they do as it's sort of showing off, right? In order to please other people or impress other people or just to attract attention to themselves, which is definitely, a very old stereotype of transgender people. And, I think most would say that that's not at all true, right? So, keeping in mind that when there are words that are different definitions of a single word, people often have no trouble separating them. But because the first meaning is so overwhelmingly common, especially I think nowadays, and the second meaning is rather niche and difficult to understand, I'm afraid that the first meaning could overwrite the second. And when someone who's not inclined to trust transgender people hears them talk about performing gender or gender performance or something like that, they're inclined to think, oh, they're just doing it for show or something like that, right? So again, you don't have to be any kind of linguist at all to see my point about this, I think. And it's not really a linguistic point at all. But I don't know. I hope this has been interesting for you. It was fun for me to record. Thanks.